I'm Dutch, and let's react to the Americans. Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Johan, and I'm a typical Dutchman. And if you're planning to come over to Europe for your holidays or to live here permanently, or if you're wondering why is everything so expensive in the United States in comparison with Europe, then you are at the right place, because in this channel I take a look and react to videos about life and living in America versus life and living and the cost of in Europe. And for today we're gonna take a look at a video of Map Pack, and it's about building high-speed rail in US is impossible. Here's why. And let's start with a like, a subscribe, and a like. I wonder why, because it's all over the world, in Europe and in Asia. So why isn't there a high-speed connection network in the United States? I'm really wondering why this is. So let's take a look.
Have you ever needed to get to Pudong International Airport in a hurry? No problem. Just hop on the Shanghai Maglev, which holds the record for the fastest train on the planet.
A maglev?
It can top out at a max speed of 311 miles an hour.
500 kph? Oh, damn! You were pushed against the chair, man.
Or 500 kilometers per hour. Want to travel at high speeds across the beautiful German countryside aboard a DB ICE-3?
I've done this one. Yeah, wow. 200 and 230, 240. Yeah, DBIs. Yeah, Deutsche Bahn, Intercontinental Express. Yeah.
Cruising at 217 miles an hour or 349 kilometers an hour along its rails? Go for it. What if you're in the mood to take a quick ride from New York City to Chicago on a bullet train? Oh, wait, you can't. Nations around the world are light years ahead of the United States when it comes to high-speed rail technology. How could the wealthiest nation on the planet have such an inferior train system? Let's find out. To be considered a high-speed train, a train must travel faster than 125 miles an hour, or just over 200 kilometers an hour. This speed doesn't have to be maintained for the entire trip, but the train should reach it for most of the journey. High-speed trains aren't a futuristic concept. They're a proven technology. Japan's Shinkansen, the world's first high-speed rail system, began operating in 1964.
In 64? Wow! That's even before I was born. I didn't know this.
That's right. While Japan revolutionized travel over 50 years ago, the United States is still struggling to catch up. Also, a web of high-speed trains allows passengers easy access to almost every major city in Europe, while the US is practically devoid of such connections. In 2009, there were ambitious attempts to expand the country's high-speed rail infrastructure. However, the plan
to expand. So there is already some kind of a high speed. I wonder. Capitalism, money is involved. I guess that the airplane business, that they are against it, that people use a train instead of an that people used a train instead of a plane.
was riddled with problems from the start. It was unclear how certain cities would be connected, as there were gaps in the tracks. To make matters worse, the plan outlined inconsistent speed limits. Some railways would reach a maximum of 250 miles an hour or 400 kilometers an hour, while others were capped at just 90 miles an hour or about 140 kilometers an hour, with no explanation. To be fair, you could theoretically get across the country by flying. However, there are some major benefits to taking a high-speed train. The fact that most plane flights between two cities are cheaper than a train ride is partly an illusion. The United States hugely subsidizes oil and gas, so the price you're paying for a plane ticket isn't really what it ought to be. If airlines were required to pay the actual price for fuel, no one would be able to afford a plane ticket as it would be too expensive. And
Airline companies, that was the word I was looking for.
since the United States stopped seriously investing in its railways a long time ago, taking the train itself has become more expensive due to a lack of demand and limited service. When you look at the population density in areas of the world that have built high-speed trains,
Yeah, that's another question. Yeah, he's right. Because it's a vast area, United States. So how many people are using the train per square or per line? Yeah.
you'll notice a stark difference between them and the United States. Places like Europe, China, and Japan have population densities that are much higher. This is actually one of the reasons why these parts of the world invested so heavily in their train networks.
Yeah, of course. More people using the train because people live.
It's also important to note that for many, having access to a train became a major part of their lives, and entire communities grew around these routes. Therefore, large numbers of people in these countries are invested in improving train infrastructure. After conventional rails spread across the landscape, the next logical step was to increase the speed of travel. This resulted in the transition to high-speed rails becoming the next step in transit evolution. The United States never embraced train travel in the same way. Even the northeastern United States, which has the most commuter rails and passenger trains in the country, has only built one high-speed rail from Boston to Washington, D.C. However, this route can be expensive and still has significant sections where high-speed velocities can't be reached. The most obvious obstacles to building a high-speed rail network in the United States are costs and logistics. Unlike simply purchasing new trains, constructing a functional high-speed rail system requires extensive groundwork. For starters, the US can't just buy high-speed trains and put them on the existing tracks, or lack thereof. The current rail infrastructure, including tracks and signals, is so outdated that it would need a complete overhaul to handle
So outdated.
the demands of high-speed travel. On top of that, certain routes are just not viable for high-speed travel, as the landscape and curvature of the track would not allow the train to reach over 125 miles an hour, which kind of defeats the purpose of using high-speed trains.
Yeah. This corner is way too sharp for a high speed. Yeah. Sometimes, yeah.
In order to fix the already existing problems with the US railway system and build new tracks to support high-speed trains, the government must purchase resources, land, and pay workers a fair wage. The sad part is
Pay workers a fair wage. What is a fair wage?
that the United States invests less in its own infrastructure than almost any other developed country in the world. Over 13% of the annual budget goes to the military, with over 47% of discretionary funds being allocated to the armed forces each year. If the US spent as much money on infrastructure as it did on its military, there would be enough money to build a high-speed rail network while also improving the transportation methods already in service. This, then, brings us to a much bigger obstacle that a high-speed train network needs to overcome
Like I said, money.
before it can be built in the United States, and that is good old-fashioned politics. The debate around high-speed trains and railroads in general has been happening for decades in the United States. The auto industry is a huge force to be reckoned with within the country, and there are definitely politicians influenced by the power and money that car companies have. But
Yeah, again. Airlines and cars.
this isn't the main issue. What it really comes down to is that the federal government is the only one who can draw up a high-speed rail plan and fund it. However, the battle surrounding state rights has stood in the way of constructing a high-speed train network ever since the idea was first proposed.
Can this not be in one state? Can a state not decide to build within its own state a high-speed rail network between larger cities within the states.
In order to build a railway network that could connect cities across state lines, the federal government would need to step in. Unfortunately, every time the federal government tries to come up with a plan for an interstate railway, it gets pushback from state representatives who believe it's overstepping its role. This problem is then exacerbated by the fact that no matter which presidency tries to start a high-speed rail project, it never comes to fruition due to the necessity of conducting multi-year studies, which oftentimes aren't completed until a newly elected official is in office. At this point, the proposed plan of the original administration is scrapped, and the new leadership has either no interest in creating their own, or they start all over again. This has led to a series of promises around high-speed rails that have not been kept. No one is arguing against impact studies being conducted and consulting experts before a high-speed rail system is built. But if every administration starts from square one when they're elected to office, there's practically a 0% chance that the United States will ever start connecting its cities by high-speed trains. This challenge is then further compounded by the fact that many states along the proposed routes have little to no experience in building modern railways. Without the necessary experience, implementing such a project would require significant oversight from the federal government, a prospect that faces steep resistance. Time and time again, administrations have proposed ambitious plans to develop the nation's railway infrastructure, yet these initiatives repeatedly fail to materialize due to a lack of long-term support and collaboration within the government. The next roadblock, or in this case,
So every 4 years, we start again, and there's no progress made. Wow. I'm happy that we in Europe, and specifically the Netherlands, that we don't have those short view. Otherwise, we would never have the Delta Works. We would never have those massive plan protecting our country from the sea.
train block has to do with the perceived corruption in the US government by its own citizens. People in the United States simply don't trust the government to do what it says it will do.
Yeah.
Although there are many differences, an interstate high-speed railway could be comparable to the interstate highway system that was designed under the Eisenhower administration in the 1950s and built in the decades that followed. More on that later. When you look at a roadmap of the United States, it's clear that a lot of time, planning, and money went into the interstate highway system. This same process could be used to implement a high-speed rail network if things were the same as they were in the 50s. When the interstate highway system was proposed and accepted, over 70% of the country trusted the federal government and supported its decisions.
And now?
That trust has since declined to around 22% in 2024. What this means is that even if the federal government does come up with a solid plan to build a high-speed rail network that is
Nobody trusts the government. Oh, where are we going?
well thought out and cost-effective, the majority of the country might not even trust them to do what they say they will. This means that until the government regains the trust of its people, it will not be able to secure funding and complete any long-term projects, including building a high-speed rail network. This ongoing stalemate is incredibly frustrating for the many Americans who dream of a nationwide high-speed rail network. Such a system would not only provide a more affordable alternative to flying or driving, but also offer a greener, more sustainable mode of travel. But until the masses push for high-speed rails to be built or the politicians in power have a change of heart, the United States will continue falling behind in this public transportation sector. Oddly enough, even more worrisome for the future of US high-speed rails than politics is that the train system itself can't get out of its own way. The transition to high-speed rails would need to happen in stages. One practical starting point is utilizing the existing freight railroads to expand access to rail travel. This would encourage more people to shift gradually from a drive-everywhere lifestyle to one where taking the train becomes a regular option. However, almost immediately, this plan runs into problems. Chicago and St. Louis have been experimenting with the idea of connecting the two cities via railway to provide a more economical way to get between them. In order to do this, passenger trains were set up to travel along the existing tracks used by freight trains. These
Sounds good.
tracks already follow routes with few road crossings and allow the trains to travel between 90 and 110 miles an hour. This would be an excellent transition for passengers looking to use trains more often, especially if high-speed rails eventually came to the area. The problem is that the freight trains still use the tracks, and since they carry huge amounts of materials, they don't go very fast. The passenger trains often get stuck behind the freight trains, which leads to long delays and makes traveling by railroad unappealing for most people. To make matters worse, freight
Okay. No scheduling.
companies run the tracks, so even though they're supposed to prioritize passenger trains by law, this rarely actually happens. What this means is that the passenger trains that are supposed to be averaging 90 miles an hour are only averaging 53 miles an hour because of delays. Therefore, taking the train is even slower than driving, which is not an ideal situation for anyone trying to get somewhere quickly. If the passenger trains had priority and could average 70 miles an hour, this alternative would be both faster and cheaper than driving. But since so little importance is put on train infrastructure, this is not a viable option yet. But
It's not profitable enough. Freight cargo trains are more profitable than a passenger train.
the biggest train block to high-speed rails is quite literally a roadblock. There's no denying that the majority of people living in the United States love their cars. From the time the Model T rolled off the assembly line to current electric vehicles, cars have always been a huge part of American culture. Most people rely on cars to get to work, visit friends, and even go on the great American road trip. Perhaps there's no better example of how much the United States favors cars than the interstate highway system. In the 1950s, the government could have come up with an interstate railroad system, but that wasn't in the cards due to the fact that car manufacturers realized how much money they could make by creating a car-dependent
Yeah, of course.
society. This led to intense lobbying that eventually resulted in the US government pouring money into the construction of roads and highways instead of railroads. People living in the suburbs with their families had little interest in hopping aboard a crowded train to get to work when they could just drive their brand new shiny Chevy to the office. The availability of cars led to more sprawl and more people moving to the suburbs. This was, and still is, a feedback loop. People want to live in the suburbs, so they need a car. People have a car, which allows them to move to the suburbs. If the United States developed in a way where most people couldn't afford, have access to, or just didn't need cars, it's highly probable that more railways would have been built to allow them to get from place to place. This would have resulted in a railroad network that could have eventually been upgraded to high-speed rails, similar to what many countries in Europe have been doing for the past several years. However, that's not how US history played out, and the obsession with owning a car or living in the suburbs only grew, which is exactly why the number of roads and highways also grew. In hindsight,
And I believe that where there are train stations that they aren't in the suburbs, you need to drive with your car to a train station to get to a train. I believe it's
this might not have been the best decision for the country, as we now face a climate crisis as a result of burning fossil fuels, some of which is done in car engines. Make no mistake, the average carbon footprint of someone living in the United States is much higher than in parts of the world where both high-speed and traditional train systems are widely used, with the exception of China. But the
Without China, yeah.
government is also partly to blame. It may be unpopular, but there is a way for the US to transition from being a car-centric culture to being more train-friendly. If the United States rebudgeted the money spent on infrastructure and directed more funds toward improving public transportation, it would be a step in the right direction. Rather than funding massive highway projects, the US could use that money to build more bike lanes and bus routes, both of which could lead to newly constructed high-speed train stations. Also, urban planning will need to shift to make US suburbs more walkable, so residents have access to public transportation and the things they need without having to hop in their cars to get there. In many countries, there are high taxes put on owning a car. For example, in Singapore, anyone who purchases a car must pay a registration tax on top of the purchasing price. This lowers the demand for cars and means more people advocate for alternative travel methods such as high-speed trains. And Singapore isn't the only country to heavily tax cars. Many countries in Europe place high taxes on owning
Netherlands,
a
yeah.
vehicle, and practically no other country subsidizes automobiles or gas at the same level as the US does. If the United States decided to increase the taxes for owning a car, this influx of money could be used to build an affordable high-speed
Wait a minute, CO2 X? Yeah, but not for people, only for companies with trucks, yeah.
rail system to carry its citizens across the country. As rail systems became more accessible, people would stop purchasing cars and start using public transportation more frequently. But US citizens have come to love their cars and the freedom they provide. Therefore, the government's only option is to make high-speed trains more appealing than traveling by car. In order for this to happen, the cost for riders must be low and the travel times must be shorter than driving. Until there is a shift in the mentality of most Americans, cars will reign supreme, and the government will have no incentive to change the country's current infrastructure. At some
Yeah. It's, yeah. That shift will take a long time.
point, however, they may not have a choice. As urban centers grow and people become more conscious of their environmental impact, they may look for more sustainable travel methods. Perhaps in the future, this will lead to a growth in high-speed rails. Luckily, when we look at the data, there does seem to be hope for the United States when it comes to high-speed trains. According to recent polls, American voters overwhelmingly support investment and construction of high-speed rails. In fact, 60% of Americans would even support additional funding to get these projects moving. High-speed rail projects also have the backing of experts. Many railroad and civil engineers agree that building a functional high-speed rail network across the US is entirely feasible. However, achieving this goal will require significant government investment, collaboration between foreign and domestic companies, and a comprehensive restructuring of the existing rail system. In certain parts of the country, hope springs eternal, as high-speed rail projects have already begun. Currently, a high-speed rail is being constructed between Las Vegas and Los Angeles by the Brightline company. The idea is that the train will be able to carry travelers between the two cities in just under 2 hours. This is under half the time it would take to drive the same distance if there were no traffic, which, let's be honest, isn't a realistic expectation for LA. Brightline has also recently completed a high-speed rail project in Florida that connects Orlando to Miami, while also making stops in West Palm Beach, Boca Raton, Fort Lauderdale, and Aventura. Brightline stated that their Florida high-speed train carried over 258,000 passengers in the month of March, just a matter of months since
Wow. That's 258,000. Sounds profitable.
the service launched. The train travels at a maximum speed of 125 miles an hour, with the trip between Orlando and Miami coming in around 3.5 hours. So, some high-speed rail progress has been made, but what about the future? If the United States doesn't want to just play catch-up, but instead wants to be a world leader in train transportation, what are the options?
Wannabe, yeah.
Climate change is the existential crisis of our time. However, a company called Wabtec may be leading a train revolution towards combating the industry's greenhouse emissions. Wabtec is experimenting with hydrogen-fueled trains that could replace the fossil fuel-burning behemoths that are currently in use around the world. That being said, many high-speed trains use electricity or magnetism, but internal combustion engines still make up a large chunk of the train market. Therefore, it might be worth investing in new technology that will allow trains to travel with much lower emission levels. Currently, the US produces an estimated 10 billion kilograms of hydrogen annually, equivalent to about 10 billion gallons of fuel. Studies suggest that powering the trains already...
What is this not? Because I see all the lines coming out. What is this central hub? I wonder what is here that everything goes there and comes from it. What is this point?
Already traveling across the country would require only 3.1 billion gallons of hydrogen fuel. That being said, the next futuristic rail technology would be even more environmentally friendly. Instead of using any type of fuel, high-speed trains could be powered by the sun. A solar rail would work the same way as a high-speed electric rail, except the energy needed to send the train and its passengers across the United States would be powered by the sun's energy. In fact, the first solar-powered train made its debut in Byron Bay, Australia in 2017, and it's still operational. The US would need to invest a lot of time and money into refining solar panels if they plan on powering a high-speed rail with the technology, but in places like the Las Vegas desert, there's ample solar radiation to capture. At a theoretical level, solar panels could be placed atop the roofs of the train cars and then supplemented by solar farms that sit along the train's route. When looking at future train technology, it'll likely be a combination of factors that help the US achieve a high-speed future. Perhaps trains will use a combination of solar, renewable energy, and hydrogen to achieve speeds over 200 miles an hour. But what about reinventing the very idea of a train? A company
What about just starting with a high-speed train?
called Priestman Good has envisioned a world with trains that can act as moving platforms. This concept is only in its infancy, and the idea is that individual slower trains would travel around a city picking up passengers and then dock with a high-speed train that would whisk them off to their final destination. But in the future, perhaps high-speed rails would allow people from one coast of the US to cross the country while specific train cars disengage at different points. Maybe a high-speed route from New York City to LA will have
Again, this point. What is at this point? Why not this way, for example?
separation locations as the train approaches Chicago, Denver,
That's the answer. Chicago.
or Las Vegas. The best part is that the people going to LA would never have to slow down. Finally, there's the Hyperloop, which
What the heck?
technically isn't a high-speed train, but an extension of what high-speed rails could be. At a basic level, a Hyperloop is like a single train car inside a tube with almost no air, a near vacuum. The tube serves two purposes. First, since it's a near vacuum, there's no wind resistance or drag, allowing the vessel to achieve high speeds with less energy. The second is to reduce friction as much as possible. By doing both of these things, the Hyperloop train could travel at speeds of 700 miles an hour, which would get you from LA to San Francisco in about 30 minutes. The
Yeah.
Hyperloop would use maglev technology, similar to the Shanghai maglev. However, with the addition of a vacuum-sealed tube, this technology would put the United States on the frontier of high-speed train technology. That being said, Hyperloop progress has stalled due to a number of factors, most having to do with high costs to low benefits. What it all comes down to is that if the United States wants to catch up to the rest of the world in high-speed train technology, it will need to spend a ton of money, time, and resources into updating its existing railway infrastructure. Then again, none of that matters if government officials can't get out of their own way and work together to help build a high-speed rail network. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. Really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack.
Yeah. Interesting video. The facts are out there. I'm not surprised that it's all about politics and money, not about technical difficulties or planning. Yeah, planning because of the politics, but yeah. Why could I not foresee? I would have foreseen this, that this would be the problem. Why in America there is still no high-speed train network. I thought it was because of not enough people using the train. That's then it's not going to be cost effective enough. So train line companies will not make and build trains, but it's all about politics. It's all about politics. Well, if you like the video, then press like, and if you want to see more of my videos, then this is a good point to start with. And it would mean the world to me if you hit the subscribe button so we can grow this channel even bigger. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.